Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 196 of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. As you know, we are a Paul McCartney talk show, mainly dealing with the solo career of Paul McCartney. And as you can see, I'm a little solo here. I'm Tom Hunyadi. You may know me from my other show, Talk More Talk. And my co-host here, he's a little under the weather. Don't bother him, because by the time this is posted, he'll be fine. But I'm going solo, but I'm not alone. And I'm very happy to say I have a wonderful person joining me today who just wrote an incredible book, and it's called In Your Mind: The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono, and she is Madeline Bocaro. Madeline, thank you for joining me for this. I know we had a little chat earlier, and then we talked with Joe, and it's just really a pleasure to get to know you, and thank you for joining us.
Same here. Thank you.
You got it. So, this book has just been killing it. I mean, review after review after review. I mean, if only Yoko could have got these reviews that you're getting for
Yeah,
this
right.
book,
Yeah.
and tell us about, some of these reviews, because you just had some great news. As we're recording this, it's February 2nd, but a couple days ago, you just got some incredible news from the Rock and Roll Hall, right?
Right. So yeah, it's gotten accepted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Library and Archives.
Right.
So that's awesome because she was there at the ribbon cutting ceremony with Little Richard. It's like, yeah,
Right.
And it's also on several best books lists and gift guides now. And
Right.
Olivia Harrison recommended
Wow.
it on Instagram, and she photographed it inside of Friar Park.
Unbelievable.
So that's like a thrill.
Absolutely. You have every right to smile and be proud of this, because, again,
I'm just happy for Yoko. It's her story, and
true.
That's what's shining through, I believe.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And the reviews are great. The last one was "This is the Bible of Yoko."
Right.
And it was
I like that one.
Fantastic. One guy told me you hit the imaginary nail on the imaginary head. I really like that.
And Sean has endorsed this book as well, right?
Sean has been very supportive. He's been retweeting all my posts. I saw him a couple of months ago, and he thanked me profusely. He said, "It's beautiful. We love it." He said, "Thank you for caring enough to be so meticulous," because he loves all the detail.
Right. Because we probably weren't going to get a bio from Yoko. I mean, especially right now at this stage in her life, right?
Right. She's not going to do it, and she's not going to be. She's very modest, so she wasn't gonna boast about it like I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about the title, In Your Mind. What does that represent to you? How does that represent Yoko to the people who are curious or are fans and want to read this book?
Well, what's interesting is most of her work is unfinished, and a lot of it is conceptual, and she's all about the mind. That everything should be interpreted in your own way, and the art should be given to you for your own use.
Right.
But the reason I chose those three words is I have this signed Indica Gallery program.
Okay.
1966, and she signed it, and I have it, and it took me like a year, and I was going through the pages because the pages are familiar. Some of them are from Grapefruit, and I'd read that stuff, so I didn't really flip through. And one day, one of the pages opened, and the sentence was, if you burn a chair, the chair in your mind doesn't disappear. And the three words of the text in your mind were left out, and she wrote them in by hand, and they just jumped out at me. In your mind. I think that's the title.
That's perfect. That's excellent. So, if somebody got this book that, say, is a relative newcomer to Yoko Ono, or has known about her for decades and really doesn't know much about her, what do you want people to learn when they read this book?
I would love for them to learn more about her as a person. That's why I included a lot of her own voice in it. Every page has quotes from her and John and Sean and some other people. I didn't interview anyone. They're all quotes of the time, as the things happened. And I just wanted to bring forth her spirit because it's so wonderful. And everything that's written about her, mostly, there's just a lot of lies. And and the opposite is true. She's just amazing. Once you meet her, you know why John loved her. There's no question.
Mm, absolutely. And then, the relationship between the two, I mean, the bond from them, so many people, you know, give her hell or whatever, but they just don't realize that, they both fell in love with each other, right? I mean,
Right. It was a very, very deep love, and it was very nourishing. They really cared for each other and supported each other in every way. And there was a lot of jealousy, I think, from fans and
oh,
whatever
yeah.
on his side or her side. And whatever it was what it was. And essentially it ended up tearing them apart,
Mm,
just all the hate that was thrown at her and
yeah, which is
the
unfortunate.
pressure.
Yeah. We did Joe Mayo's show, and we talked about our favorite, our 10 favorite songs from hers, and then I just mentioned briefly of a track called "I Learned How to Stutter," which basically tells you what all of your people's hate, did to her.
Right.
Which is
To explain it is
yeah,
she thought of herself as a very confident,
right.
elegant woman.
Mhm.
She was, speaking out for women's rights, doing her art,
Yeah,
and from all this negativity, she developed a stutter.
right,
And, she's like, look what they did to me at this point. And she had to overcome that.
right. Hmm. How do you see her as a, because I mean everybody knows her as a screamer. I mean, I don't know what's the proper way to say her, that I mean, is it just screaming, yelling, wailing? I mean, what how would she describe that?
Well, it's a scream. I once asked her, what could you say with a scream that you can't say with words? And she said
Right.
it expresses a much deeper emotion that
Mm,
there's words can't describe.
right.
And it just comes from an incident in her childhood where she heard that, a description of a woman screaming in childbirth. And in Japan, it was very unheard of for a woman to even speak loudly, let alone scream.
Mm,
And, the whole society was very repressed and all. And
right.
once she heard that, it just clicked with her. It just became kind of a little obsessive thing, but it was an outlet for her. And
Right.
she imagine the amount of pain she had in so many aspects of her life that she was trying to express.
Right. Because I mean that was kind of our introduction to Yoko's vocal stylings, right? Besides the continuing story of Bungalow Bill.
Mhm.
I mean it's that, is what people were introduced to, right? So they just think, okay, that's all she ever did, right? I mean, let's talk about her songwriting and her as a lyricist, because as I've been learning too, I'm discovering that she's an amazing lyricist.
Oh, she's incredible. I mean, it's all honest, it's all truth, it's all
Right.
from her life, and it had to be incredible, right? I mean,
Right.
she was talking about of how John influenced her musically and all. And this is a direct quote. Obviously, I learned about rock and pop from John. He also had very astute observations about people on a very realistic level that I didn't have.
Mm,
Surrealism was natural for me. It's easier for me to describe my emotions in a surrealistic way. But here was this guy who was straightforward. If I was beating around the bush, he would say, what do you really mean? How can you read a surrealistic poem and not know what they're talking about? It's just word weaving or mind weaving. You think it seems beautiful, but what's the point? I would have headed toward that maybe. I might have been a nice old middle aged spinster. Instead, John gave me back the body. He woke me up from my mind game. That was very healthy for me.
right. But then also in a kind of a way, we talked a little bit about this separately, is um you know we know, and we'll get into this more when we talk about the relationship between from Yoko and Paul, but she had this career before John as
Right.
well. I mean, she was a very successful avant-garde artist,
She
right?
was.
You know,
Yes, she had actually, there was 33 years before she met him. She was 33, and there
hmm,
was 12 years with him with the separation in between. And
right,
then there were 40 years after his death. And think about it, Paul had kind of been with John around the same length of time
right,
as they were together.
right.
So, think about how fast the past 10 or 12 years of your life went by. And that's it. That's what they had.
Right.
So that's really incredible if you think about it.
Right. I mean, I'd say that, for somebody who hasn't listened to any of her music, I always kind of say listen to like Hell in Paradise or Walking on Thin Ice first, because that, I mean, that's, let's face it. I mean, it's poppy, it's catchy. People may have known Hell in Paradise from MTV, because I mean I saw that a lot on MTV
Yeah.
back in '85. And obviously Walking in Thin Ice, because that, I mean, that's important just for the fact that, I mean, it was the last thing John worked on before
Right.
his, death,
But
unfortunately.
people aren't aware that she has complete albums of
Right.
rockers and ballads, and she's singing
Yes.
beautifully, and they just don't know.
Right. So let's talk about some of your favorite tracks of hers. Give me 5 songs that you think people should know and appreciate.
Okay, so in my book, I go through every album and every
Right.
song,
Hmm.
and I don't throw them in the back as a discography. I just place them where they belong in her story.
Right.
And there's actually a chapter called Queen of the Scream, and it's about all her musical influences and how she arrived at the point of screaming
Right.
and all that. But I'm going to pick different ones than we picked the other night. So
Right.
a beautiful ballad is I'm Going Away Smiling. It's on Between My Head and the Sky from 2009.
Okay.
And it's just beautiful. It's sweet and ethereal. There's a theremin on there on the track. It pulls your heartstrings.
Hmm.
And actually, Iggy Pop covered it on one of
Oh.
his
Oh.
albums, Après, in 2012.
Cool.
And it's just amazing.
I'm
Very
sure you
sad.
liked that, being an Iggy Pop fan
Oh,
yourself.
yeah. Iggy and Yoko are my favorite. And since we mentioned Vine Train last time, Waiting for the D Train is another favorite train
Hmm.
song.
Right.
And it's very reminiscent of, Why or Don't Worry Kyoko. It's in that plodding rock vein. It's wild. Um, and she released that at the age of 76.
Wow.
And, D Train stands for death. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's just another rocker. It's really
Okay.
cool. And then I picked Don't Count the Waves,
Hmm.
which is from Fly, one of the
Okay.
avant-garde kind of stylings with Joe Jones Tone Deaf Music Company. He created all those instruments for her, and some of them played by the wind or just very strange percussive sounds. And I just think they're gorgeous. So,
Okay.
yeah. And what else? She explained that the songs on Fly are the first and second sides are rock songs with a physical beat, and the third and fourth sides are
Hmm.
mind music with a mind beat.
Hmm.
So that's how she viewed it. She wanted to explore emotions and vibrations, which hadn't been explored in music before.
Oh. Okay.
And I picked I Have a Woman Inside My Soul from our favorite, Approximately Infinite Universe. And that's just bluesy and sax laden with, of course, Elephant's Memory
Yep.
and Stan Bronstein on sax. It's lamenting and sad. And it's just strange to me because the lyrics show sign a kind of a disconnect. And she's usually very connected and understanding of her own thoughts. But in this one, she's not understanding what the sad voice in her soul is telling her,
Hmm.
or why, what the inscription on a tombstone says. She can't see what it says. And uh, everything's kind of unclear in that, but it's such a beautiful song.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to pick a cool one, New York Noodle Town. I love it's from 2013 from the album Take Me to the Land of Hell. And the title track of that is kind of reminiscent of Mrs. Lennon. And
Oh.
she's
Okay.
asking, Blood River, take me to the lands of hell where you and I meet soul to soul and never apart again.
Hmm.
And it's kind of strange because the blood is mentioned in both songs, and she's
Yeah.
asking to be taken back to the place where she and John were, which was actually hell. But she's rather be in hell with him than anywhere else without him.
Right.
So I just find like that's those two songs are kind of related. But New York Noodle Town is just a light hearted song, and it's like an anthem to New York City. And she's just, it's kind of like Winter Friend on a story where she's
Hmm.
trudging through Chinatown through the snow for noodles and to noodle. And this one, I picture her with the same guy, like walking to New York Noodle Town, which is a real restaurant in the city.
Wow.
And yeah, it's just really cool.
We also talked a little bit about Mrs. Lennon the other night too, and you know, is that kind of like her, feeling like she's losing her identity? Because you mentioned about the gardener coming up to her and calling her Mrs. Lennon, and
Yeah.
then it hit her that she's not the lone
She's
wolf
not
again.
Ms. Yoko
Yeah,
Ono
yeah,
only.
right. What do you think?
I think that's true. Yeah, that she was being sublimated a bit, and she kind of expected that to happen. But she
Hmm.
and John really were equal partners, although the world didn't really see it that way. But in their minds, they knew it. They had that pact. She said, "Look, it's either equal or nothing,"
Right.
and he went with it. So
You also, I mean, you've met Yoko. You talk about meeting her back in the '80s, and then being able to experience things with her too, whether it's their live shows or premieres at the movie screenings. Which I want to get to that one in a minute, but talk about the experience of seeing Yoko live.
oh, it's great. Well, anyone who bought a ticket is there because they love her. So it's
Hmm.
fantastic. It's, she's really commands an audience,
Hmm.
whether she's whispering or screaming and she's always very personable, telling stories in between, one time she did Mind Train and she said, oh, well, when we recorded this, me and John played it for a well-known musician, and he sat through all the 17 minutes of it, which I was getting nervous, but John was just so proud of it. And and I was like, oh, is this guy really going to listen? And it turned out it was Bob Dylan. Like, I have so much more respect for him now. He listened to that for 17 minutes.
Wow,
Yeah.
crazy. Another really cool thing that we talked about, when we first met was, and I love this, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. A lot of people know that this was put on the shelf for years. I mean,
Mhm.
decades, even.
Yeah.
And this was filmed in December of '68. A couple days before the Let It Be or the Get Back sessions started,
Right.
as a
Right.
matter of fact, and John and Yoko were there. They performed, and you actually got to see a screening of this before. Now, was this before that it was released on home video?
It was when it was released. It was a
Okay.
promotional screening,
Hmm.
and we were in the theater, and I was sitting near Johnny, Yoko, and Sean, and it was funny because Keith Richards came in late, and he came like reaching over me to take Yoko's hand, and he was like really drunk. Those were the days, huh?
That's cool. Just to be, I guess, to be in the same building as Keith.
Yeah, it was fun.
Must have been pretty cool. Okay, let's. So again, in your mind, the infinite universe of Yoko Ono. Tell people, and we'll do again later on in the show. But how do people get this book?
It's on Amazon, and that's probably your best bet internationally for
Mhm.
postage reasons. And it's also available through me at conceptualbooks.com, and the hardcover is only available through me, and
Okay.
there's an option of getting it signed.
Absolutely. I was fortunate to get this baby signed for
Nice.
Madeline, and yeah, and you're gonna be at the Fest for Beatle fans this year too, right?
Yes,
At
I
least
am.
the New Jersey one.
My second year at the Jersey
Yeah,
one. Yes, it was pretty nice last time. I sold a lot of books, and people were very warm and welcoming. It's
right.
beautiful.
And you did a couple panels last year, and I expect maybe you'll do another one or a couple
Yeah,
more.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing you there again. I know I did see you there last year, but we didn't really meet,
Mhm.
uh, face to face. I'm kicking myself in the ass now for that, but
That's okay. I was
yeah,
chained to my table. I couldn't really
right.
circulate.
but looking forward to seeing you there this year. Now, um, one of the reasons why, besides the book, I thought it'd be really cool to discuss a relationship between Paul and Yoko, which again we all know has been going back decades, even longer than how long John and Yoko knew each other for the most part, right? I mean,
Right.
because Paul and Yoko first met back in fall of '66, and tell us a little bit why she seeked McCartney out.
So it was John Cage's birthday, and he's, for people that don't know, he's kind of an avant-garde composer who she had a working relationship with, along with her first husband, Toshi Ichinagi. He was a composer, and they did a lot of work together in Japan and New York. And she was collecting manuscripts for a book that was going to be called Notations, and it was going to be put together for John Cage for his birthday. And she was going to different composers. Now, in her mind, you have to realize she she didn't see music as rock and roll, right?
Okay.
She saw it as more how can I put it? Beatles weren't in her cultural realm.
Right.
There was no rock and roll when she was a teenager. It was not. She was born in 1933. Okay, so
right.
she was doing cutting edge things while the Beatles still had Pete Best on drums. She was doing concert series in her loft in Manhattan, getting together all kinds of avant-garde artists and allowing them to do their work. And a funny story is it's in Peter Brown's book, which is not necessarily, I'm not a fan necessarily of the book, but it's a really great indication. And the Beatles were sitting around speaking about when they were at Shea Stadium, and Yoko says, well, what were you doing at a baseball stadium? And they said, well, we did sold out concerts there. And she said, oh, well, I did this at Carnegie Hall, and I did that year. And,
Right.
she was just talking in her own world. So, when people say, go, she heard of the Beatles, she knew, there's not, both her and John were always very honest. And there's not one time where I've heard her waver from that, So she approaches Paul, and she thinks she's going to get like a musical notation, like a manuscript. And
right.
Really they didn't even write notation, the Beatles, right? It's just really,
right.
So he did, of course, have lyrics and all, but he didn't want to part with them. So he said, well, go look for John Lennon. And I don't think she really had the chance to really look for John and locate him, because very shortly after her encounter with Paul, she met John by chance at her Indica Gallery opening. And that was the start of it all.
Yeah.
Yoko turned up to see me first in London. She met me before she met John.
Yes, no, I didn't know that.
See, this is what I mean. And you won't hear it off them either, because they're Scott and Zelda. They want the story just how they put it out. She turned up for a charity thing. It was something to do. She wanted manuscripts, something to do with avant-garde music. Cage, John Cage, in New York. There was some benefit for somebody, and she was looking for manuscripts. Any spare lyric sheets you had around, and ours pretended to be on the backs of envelopes, quite funky little things. And to tell you the truth, I didn't want to give her any. Big deal. So, I'm allowed. I don't have to, do I? I didn't want to. I kept these manuscripts. They're very precious to me, and the cause didn't seem so great. I forget what it was. So I said, but my mate might be interested. John, I gave her John's address, and I think that was first how they hooked up. And then she had her exhibition and stuff, and then their side of the story starts to happen then.
Yeah, and the rest is history, as they say, for Yoko and John. So moving forward now, you say you talk about these Yoko diaries from 1968, and then we also know from Paul in '69 that they both actually you didn't really realize that they were actually talking very fondly about each other right?
Yeah, well, you hear Yoko saying, Paul's being really nice to me. He's kind of like very on the level and straight and with me, and he's treating me kind of like a brotherly, in a brotherly way. And like if they need a light fixed or they need something, he asked me if I know anyone in the industry who could help. He kind of respected her in that way. And you know, he's treating her with respect. And she's saying, I hope it stays this way. If I had a woman, it would have been, if I hadn't been a woman, it would have been different because she would have been more of a threat if she was a guy that John was
Right.
kind of palling around with. So, at the beginning, it was fine
Cool.
until John brought her into the studio, I guess. Posted her on everyone.
Well, yeah, because I mean, we get comments from the other three, about Yoko being in the studio, right, and how that was never allowed before. Why is girlfriends or friends or whatever? I mean, no,
Well, that was just John. He wanted it to be in your face. He's like, look, I'm with her now. You're going to look at her too. And she wasn't necessarily fond of it. You can see she's bored. She's kind of knitting and writing and doing calligraphy. She's probably plotting her next art exhibition. She's not thinking. So, and then when he told her he was going to be leaving the band, there's a quote from her from the time. Go ahead.
Right. Well, let's get to that in 1 second because I got that separate and a little from this. But besides talking nice to each other, because there's also the part in the Get Back special that we got on Disney Plus a little while ago. I think it was back in 21, where Paul is actually the one speaking very fondly of Yoko and saying that she's all right, and that they're going to be together. They're going to be together, and there's no point in and you had made the conversation we were talking about this is like, if John knew this, right? I mean, this might be a whole completely different deal.
Oh yeah, and if they heard George saying he had all these songs for an album and he was going to do let's all do side projects and get back together for Beatles stuff. Yeah, I mean, if only these conversations were overheard.
Right. So, still in '68, we talked about, Hey Jude, okay, and John thinking that's about him, right, meeting Yoko. I mean, we know that it was started as a song for his son Julian, right, and then it just worked into completely another song, about a guy seeking a woman, and John sometimes he misreads into songs, as we know, and from the whole Ram fiasco a few years later. But what are your thoughts on that? Because you seem to think that subconsciously maybe it is about John and Yoko.
Well, there are some lines in there that are obviously not about a little boy. Okay, you have found her, now go and get her. You're waiting for someone to perform with.
Right.
And perform. It had to be Yoko. And then there's the line, so let it out and let it in. And that's probably something to do with the first thing that Yoko ever gave to John. And it was a card that said, breathe.
Interesting. Yeah, because the lyrics book that came out from Paul last year, I was looking up the Hey Jude section and see if there's any thought maybe he changed his mind and say, oh yeah, I did write this for John or whatever. But he doesn't talk anything about that, and I'm kind of surprised because like you said, there are some connections there, whether they're coincidental or not, maybe. But I mean, I could see there being an argument for that.
John was pretty adamant that
right,
it was mostly about that relationship.
Right. And then another thing too is I know it's kind of rough to talk about, but the and especially if you don't believe Paul's girl at that time, Francine Schwartz, and she in her book she writes about how John and Yoko were over, and John was going through his fan mail, right, and then he says this letter saying, you and your Jap tart think you're hot shit or something like that. I have not seen anything of John and Yoko ever saying anything about that. Have you seen anything on that?
I remember those words, seeing them written in a newspaper, whether it was John mentioning it or something.
Okay.
But they were at each other's throats because of legal problems,
right? Mm-hmm.
and that's really most of the reason they were at odds.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just going to blurt out anything they could to hurt each other, So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because there was no. I mean, even though Paul regrets now that he never said he loved him. I mean, you couldn't do that. As a male, in 1960s London, there was no, sensitivity, towards each other,
Yeah.
which I find kind of funny. But so then, after that, then as we say, we'll get back now to, Paul. We know he did not want the Beatles to end. Right.
No.
He would have been happy being a Beatle the rest of his life. And then there's someone else that didn't want the Beatles to end, and that was, in a way, was kind of Yoko, right?
Oh, well, yeah, she wasn't really consciously thinking that, but when John turned to her and said he's going to leave the band, she shuddered, because she thought, well, wait a minute, what's he going to be preoccupied with while I do my own work?
Mm-hmm.
So, she was just wondering, like, what's it going to be? And he actually said to her, so now it's just you and me. And she's like, what? She never collaborated with anyone before. She did everything independently. Mm-hmm. But guess what? They hit the ground running. Why? And they virgins, the settings, and they just did it. And they had fun with it too.
And it just seems like it just came naturally.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was no effort at all. And it just, let's do this. Okay, mm-hmm. No problem. Let's, take a nude selfie. Okay, no problem. Let's, let's.
Take it with a timer. Clear the room.
Yeah, right.
You want to see.
Right. Like you said, the bedding, no problem. It's really is. It's amazing how effortless a lot of this was. I mean, I remember the bed-in, and then they're calling calling with California when they were trying to protest out there, right? And they're telling the kids, what to do, which is, again.
But how much they crammed in. I mean, just 68, right. And 69, two virgins, the bed-in, the war is over posters, the Acorn event, the Bagism, it's too much. The films they were doing together.
Yes.
Too.
Right. Films. Wow. So let's talk.
A funny Paul quote in the Two Virgins.
Yeah, go ahead.
Section. So, he Paul always prided himself as being the avant-garde one, because he was into the art. He had an art collection, and he was into the galleries and all, and he was listening to Stockhausen and Varese and Ornette Coleman, and he's cool, right? But John was secluded in the suburbs, and he couldn't, go to these shows. He didn't have access. But here comes Yoko, and they're doing Two Virgins. So, John beat him to the punch. But the funny thing Paul says is that, I got pissed off that John became the avant-garde one, because 3 years before he got loose, I was going to a lot of concerts, and he was living out in Weybridge, pipe and slippers time. And I didn't want to say I did it first, but it was niggling me a bit that it was going down in posterity that John was the cool one and Paul was a bit soppy. So Paul says he did a loop symphony, and he was going to all these concerts, experimental and modern composers, and the loops would find their way onto different Beatles tracks and all. But he said to John one day, I've got all this stuff, and I'm thinking of putting it out as an album called Paul McCartney Goes Too Far. And John says, yeah, brilliant, do it, please.
Unfortunately, he never. Yeah. Unfortunately, he never did. I mean, and then sometimes when he does get experimental, right, he calls it, he doesn't put McCartney on it. You know what I mean? He will put like the Fireman or Twin Freaks. You know what I mean? It's just not. It's not Paul McCartney, which, I wish that would be different. But so a few years later, then as we jump into the 70s, John and Yoko are everywhere. They're in New York. Come 71. Right there, or is this late 71 that they go to New York?
Yeah, summer pretty much. Yeah.
Right. Okay. There's the Ram thing. There's the how do you sleep thing. John and Yoko are doing a lot of TV at that time. I was just
Mhm.
watching some of the Mike Douglas stuff the other day, and I was watching the episode with George Carlin on it, and it was I hadn't seen those in a while, so it's kind of fun to go back and do that. And then so what they were doing then was on that show was there was that broken teacup, right? And then every day they were assembling it,
Mending it.
mending it, right? Which was, again, I mean, that's the mind of Yoko, I think.
Yeah, mend piece, wrapping piece is all about healing and
Mm-hmm.
coming back together. I mean,
Right.
yeah, that's how she communicated.
So the real, let's get to the real meat and potatoes of this, because there's the, as we know, it's the lost weekend. John and Yoko separate for a little while, and we don't really necessarily know exactly when this happened, right? Because they separated. I think Paul goes to California to start talking about. Anyways, Yoko goes to see Paul, and this is in UK then, right? I believe
No, Paul actually says that they visited her at the Dakota.
when she asked him to help.
He actually says that he asked her, because I don't think she would have really approached him about it,
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think it was, and he says during the Chris Salavic interview that she came to him, and we're gonna play that clip too.
Good.
I was telling you about the marriage thing. When they broke up, Yoko came through London and visited us, which was very nice. And Linda and I just got married a bit before. We lived in this big sort of old house in St. John's Wood. And Yoko came by and we started talking. Obviously the important subject for us is what's happened. You've broken up then, you're here, he's there. What's happened? And she was very nice and confided in us that, it's kind of broken up. But she was being very strong about it, but very, not feminist, but being a strong woman rather than just submitting to it all. And she said, no, he's got to work his way back. If he's to get back with me, I can't just go. And she couldn't, which is good, I think she would be mad to just go and prostrate herself at his feet kind of thing. But she said, no, he's going to have to work it. And I said, well, look, if I see him, are you still in love? Do you still sort of love him? She said, yeah. I said, well, would you think it was an intrusion if I kind of said to him, look, man, she loves you, and there's a way to get back, and you can, it sounds like Beatles songs, it sounds like those, I send all my loving from me to you. And I said this to Yoko, I said, would that be okay? Would you hate that? But we might see him around, so I would like to be a mediator in this, because I think the two of you obviously got something pretty strong going. And she said she didn't mind. So that was that visit. And we went out to visit them and they were doing Pussycats. And it was weird, kind of just meet and everything. But then I just said to John, who was in the house with Nielsen, Jesse, Keith Moon, a few of the guys, and they were all, it was a pretty crazed house there. You hear some of the stories come out of that house, and it was pretty wild days. And I said to him, hey, come here. Come in the back room, I want to talk to you privately. So we went in the back room and I sat him down privately and I said, look, I feel a bit like a matchmaker here, but this girl of yours, she really still loves you. Do you love her? In a divorce court, divorce settlement, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I'll talk to her. So she does still love you, but you're going to have to work your little ass off, man. You have to get back to New York, you have to take a separate flat, you have to send her roses every fucking day, you have to work at it like a bitch, and you just might get her back, which is sort of what he did. But you'll never hear that story. You won't hear that off them, because, I don't know, it gives me too much, I'm too in the story then. They don't want me in the story. They prefer to think, John, if you hear it from John's point of view, it'll just be that he spoke to her on the phone and she said to him, come back and sort of work.
Once they got back together at the Elton John show, then that was it. They were back together, when that's not really the case. There was still a couple months, before John actually had to, ask her out on dates and stuff like that. And then they got back together. But either way, whether it's Paul, going to her and talking about it, or Yoko going to Paul and talking about it. Either way, it's never part of that story. You know what I mean? And it's like, why can't the best mate be part of that story, because he helped get them back together in a way.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, Yoko spoke about it later on,
Yes.
and on John's 70th birthday, she made a statement. She's like, I want the world to know that it is a very touching thing what Paul did for John. He was genuinely concerned about his old partner, even though John was not even asking for help. All of them were too proud to ask her anything. And John often said he didn't understand why Paul did this for us, but he did. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just don't understand why John would say I don't understand why. You know what I mean? I mean, they might not have been best friends at that point in time, but they were. You know what I mean? It's still
was complicated.
Yeah, I get you, and it's still family. I would sure if if they didn't talk at all for years, I'm sure one or the other would still try to help the other out, as much as possible. If they could. So it's just interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that Paul has to be a part of everything, or what he did was him being right about Alan Klein. I mean, I'm not saying that Paul doesn't need to brag about all this stuff, but I think it's still important that people know this. I mean, whether or not it's in the story, in a written story. It's a great story nonetheless. The John and Yoko story is a wonderful one.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, there's a piece where Yoko spoke in Rolling Stone. Well, actually, there's quotes from Linda also. And she says the sad thing is that John and Paul both had problems and they loved each other. And boy, could they have helped each other if they had only communicated.
Right.
And it was about the litigation and all that. So
yeah, no, I hear you. Absolutely. And then what's the song from Yoko that's about the communication? I'm missing. I can't remember.
Talk?
Straight Talk. Yeah. Tell me what you want. Which is, I wouldn't be surprised if that was about John. Tell me, be straight, and we'll work it out.
There's a nice piece in Rolling Stone that Yoko wrote right after Linda's passing. And she said, during the Beatles sessions, Linda and I quickly learned that our husbands were not all buddy-buddy. John and Paul were both talented, but very strong-willed people. There was some tension there. Linda and I left them alone. We both stood by our men. Then came the Beatles breakup. The world blames it on Linda and me. The attack was a storm. The fans needed a scapegoat, and they chose us. We both had the love and protection of our husbands. The years after the breakup were not easy either. John and Paul were not talking. John would play Paul's latest Wings record in our kitchen. He couldn't say it to Paul, but when Paul was not around, John would say nice things about Paul. When Paul and Linda got a farm in Scotland, John would say, that's Linda, she's good for him. Was the ice finally starting to melt? In the later 70s, Paul and Linda came to visit us a few times in New York. In fine old Liverpool tradition, the two guys did most of the talking, and we sat beside them as Paul held Linda's hand and John held mine. It was nice to see the guys talk after all those years, even if a little stiffness existed between them. So that's how it was.
And imagine if they had more time to build on that, There's actually a lot of similarities between Yoko and Linda with their, with John and Paul. I mean, we talked a little bit about that, joining the band, with not a lot of musical experience, right?
Not only that, they both went to Sarah Lawrence College. They both had young daughters. They married John and Paul within a week of each other.
Right.
And
it wasn't their first marriage either.
Right. And Linda encouraged Paul to start Wings when he was so depressed after the Beatles, and Yoko encouraged the Plastic Ono Band, and both of them sang with the bands. And
right.
Had a lot in common.
A lot of common. there's also, it wasn't all wine and wine and roses, as they say. Yoko and Paul have been kind of vocal about each other, throughout the years. I know, I remember, I think it was during the Wings Over America album, Paul switched the credits to McCartney Lennon.
No.
And I know Yoko may have had a little issue with that because then he did it again, and I think in a future, I forgot which album he did it again on another live album. I think it was Paul is Live, if I'm not mistaken. But is that time up? No, I was kidding.
I have to quit this thing. Okay, it's
Yeah.
quit. So
No, that's okay. Couple years. Well, I should say 1980 was interesting because we'll talk a little myth here, a little myth busting, where Paul sees, or Paul calls John, right, and tells him he has some dynamite weed. This is, I think, the day before they fly off to Japan. Okay, he gets there, they get busted, or he gets busted, I should say. And then somehow a little lie gets out, and people, or rumors gets out, and people are thinking that Yoko may have had something to do with his bust, but in reality, she actually, in a way, kind of helped, in a way, to get him out, right?
well, I'm just going to say that I would suspect, first of all, how can anyone know what gate somebody's coming through at a
Right.
Japanese airport and say, bust this guy with the pot in his bag and don't let him go? I mean, even if John and Yoko wanted to do that, I don't see how it's possible. And if anything, Yoko's relatives were all in high places in Japan. She came from one of the three wealthiest families in Japan. So
Mhm.
if anything, they helped Paul get out. I mean, who knows for sure?
Right. Yeah, I know that. I mean, no one knows 100% sure, and I'm sure it's not like Yoko to just go into the public and say, "Oh, I helped you, Paul, get out of
Oh,
jail."
no.
Yeah, it's definitely not in her nature. But it's still. I mean, it's still a thing, though. People still want to believe that Yoko is is evil, and she did
It's
this to.
insane. They can't be more far from the truth.
Right. Right. Unfortunately, John is murdered. The relationship of, now they're business partners in a way, right?
Yeah.
So not only now do they have, you know to compete with each other. I mean, they're in business with each other now, and I think they're trying to maybe compete with the media in a way of saying, okay, who was more important to John? Was it Yoko? Was it Paul? There was this thing where John became a saint, after his passing, and then a couple of years later, then Paul, you see him trying to be on the defensive here. Okay, I mean, it's just wasn't all John. Okay, I helped a lot of songs. There was George and Ringo that helped on those, but Yoko in a way really didn't step up, in a way I think she kind of welcomed it a little bit. I mean, this is just my opinion. But I didn't see a lot of writing where like people were like, okay, this isn't true, stop it, but what do you think about this? Because Lennon was considered, the man. He was the Beatles after he passed, according to a lot of people.
Look, she was protecting his legacy. She was giving the fans the music every single year. She put out something.
Right.
Give them all the
Yeah,
Lost
that's right.
Lennon tapes. She made sure
Yes.
it was all, she gave them Free as a Bird and Real Love. And even now, working on the Imagine 50th and all that stuff. Of course, Paul, if it was Paul's widow, she would
Right.
have been doing the same thing.
Yeah, perhaps, absolutely. There was an opportunity for them to be even more more into business with each other, with the buying of Northern Song, that was going up for sale. I know Paul felt like he didn't need to buy, or buy his songs back, or he felt he shouldn't have to buy his songs back. I mean, I think Yoko and Paul were wealthy enough at the time to at least go in 50-50, for this. And then, Paul gives that the advice, business advice to Michael Jackson, and then all of a sudden he swoops in and and he had the sense to have his lawyers get all of this stuff ready. While Paul and Yoko were, I don't know if they were having a war of words in the media or anything like that, but they could have, met or just discussed to say, hey, do you want to join in this venture and acquire the rights to our songs? Interesting. It's interesting stuff. Again, we're not there, right? All we can go by is what we read, quotes that we see in papers and articles and stuff like that. But that would have definitely, by acquiring the rights, that would have just put them into the enchilada of Paul was already one of the wealthiest musicians in the world. And that would have even put Yoko right up there as well. What do you make of the relationship between Paul and Yoko throughout the 80s?
Well, I have a quote from her, and she says that me and Paul were kind of stuck with the situation for like 30 or 40 years, so we understood each other, and he must have suffered a lot just like I suffered the same way. So I understand him. I'm sympathetic to him for having all sorts of pain. Most people think that Paul and me should not have any pain at all because we're so privileged, but it's not true. The degree of pain is always there. So, she understood where he's coming from, but of course she kind of had to deal with him. And look, at this point, they have an understanding.
Right.
And there's this quote from Paul where he says, I love Yoko. She's so Yoko. That's it. She's Yoko.
Right. There's also a video that we'll play during the show here too.
The problem in other people's eyes, I think, is that she's honest. The honesty is what hurts a lot of people, I think. We didn't know her too well, really, until quite recently, until maybe
a few years ago.
80s, beginning of the 80s, when I just thought, well, maybe I've misunderstood. Maybe it's my mistake, not hers. So I telephoned her and started talking to her about just things generally. She said, why are you telephoning? And I said, well, I think I've misunderstood you, and I think I've made a big mistake, and as you were John's wife, and I was very fond of John, I feel that he would have liked me to telephone you and kind of say hello and see what's going on. And she said, well, don't do me any favors, don't do it out of pity or don't sympathy. I don't want that, I don't want charity. Which at first I thought, but I had to say, no, she's right. She's right. I thought she was a hard woman. I don't think she is now. I think she's just the opposite. I think she's a very loving, caring woman. I thought she was pushy, which I think's wrong. I don't think she is. I think she's just herself. She's determined more than some other people to be herself. Some people will just give in. She won't.
After John dies, Paul, calls up Yoko, and he's in his mind he's thinking, well, John would want this, and he's explaining it to Yoko, and Yoko's like, well, don't do this out of pity, and Paul's like, well, that's how it's going to be, but then he, you do when you're trying to be level-headed, you think about it, and then in the long term, you finally understand where she's coming from, right? And then it makes sense. I'm sure John, like you said in that quote, Paul was hurting just as much as Yoko, I'm sure. So it's going to take time for them to, well, it did take time for them to actually eventually, get on the same page about their feelings.
Right. And Paul mentioned that, Yoko was the first one who ever told him that, John really did.
That's right.
Love you and your work. He
Right.
didn't never say it to his face, but
Yeah. Yep. Let's talk about the Paul inducting John into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That night, it looked like they were all in great spirits. I don't know if I would say that was the best speech from Paul inducting. I know what did you? I mean, you had to have seen it.
Yeah, wait, which one was it?
This is when I mean he's pretty much just going through their history, and he's like in a way kind of talking to John rather than
oh yeah, you were this and you were
right yeah. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious what everybody watching thinks. Let us know in the comment section what you think of Paul's speech inducting John into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I don't think it's the best thing he's ever done myself. But I mean, again, obviously, very heartfelt. He did it with the understanding that he would get inducted the following year, from my understanding, which didn't happen. And I believe they should have been inducted the same year. I don't understand why it took another 4 or 5 years for Paul to get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's another show, right? Yeah. I mean, we all have our issues with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's where Yoko gives Paul the demos for the other three, or the Threedles, if you want to call them that, to begin the anthology.
Here tonight, it's a privilege to come along and to do this. John, no matter what people thought of him from minute to minute, was a very, very beautiful person. And it's an honor to be able to do this with Yoko and Sean. It's just a lot of fun, and it's a privilege, because he was some serious dude.
Well, everyone says Beautiful Boy was your favorite John Lennon song, and I thought that was a real nice choice.
Beautiful Boy, yeah.
What was it about that song?
Well, I got kids, and I know that emotion, and I think John captured it perfectly in that song. That's what it is.
What emotions do you have when you hear Beautiful Boy?
Well, that's the answer.
Well, it's obviously something really personal, it's really beautiful.
Can Paul and Yoko please talk about the emotional feeling of being here tonight and being together?
May I say this, that I really think it's grand that he's come here, and I'm very happy about that, and I think that Joe would have been very pleased.
And Paul, what do you feel emotionally to be here?
Yeah, I feel great. I mean, we just came right in from England, so I'm a bit jet lagged, but it was a beautiful evening, just generally with all the other inductees and stuff, but obviously this was the highlight for me. Seeing Yoko after quite a while, getting back together again, and getting back together and seeing Sean, who is the son of my mate. And, it's just good to be back together again.
Right. And she said something interesting. She said, everybody blamed me for breaking them up, but here's my chance. Like, fate brought it to me to bring them together in a way.
Together. Right. Because, we'll get to this in a minute, but later on, Paul set the record straight, which was great. Then we go to 1995. I think they're like halfway into working on the songs, Real Love and Free as a Bird. Paul invites the Lennons over to his studio, and they record Hiroshima, Sky is Always Blue. Talk about that song.
John, we're here now together. Bless you, peace on earth, and strawberry fields forever. Hiroshimaの 愛よいつも青いよ広島 sky is always beautiful. It's always空は青いよいつも青いよいつも青いよの空はいつも青いよいつも青いよ Hiroshima's sky, always blue, always
Yeah, that was to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombings in Japan. And Paul and Linda and their children collaborated with Yoko and Sean. And it was just this long improvisational track.
Right.
And I think it was broadcast on Japanese TV on the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And it was recorded in January. And they spent weekends at Paul's farm. And, you know, Paul showed them around the studio and they decided to do it. And yes, nice, really nice.
Yeah, it says, you know, Yoko on vocals, Paul backing vocals, stand-up bass, Linda Celeste, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you got Sean and James on guitars, Heather, Mary, Stella backing vocals and percussion. The track was mixed on spot and handed over to Yoko. Now, you can only really get it on physical media in one place, right? And that's, I think, on CD for one of her books or something like that.
Yeah, I forget which book. I think it's, I forget now. It's one of the gallery books, I think.
Right. Okay. And then that's the only way you can get it. I mean, obviously you can listen to it on YouTube if you want, but if you actually wanted a physical media, you had to go to order that book, which is interesting. Then fast forward into the 2000s, Paul, you know, is finally coming out and say, you know, Paul or Yoko did not break up the band. They were already breaking up. If you do the research, you know, you'll find, as we have been finding over the last couple decades, that, you know, they were already breaking up anyways. And, you know, maybe the, Yoko and Linda could be just like a small part of the frustration of, you know, of the band, but it was nowhere near the breaking point. You know what I mean?
We're Patty and Maureen. I mean,
right. Well, they weren't coming to the studio. I mean, obviously, you did see Maureen there, you know, during the Get Back sessions a couple times, but it's not like, you know, they were all, you know, now everybody is invited into the sessions.
Yeah,
you know,
it's John for bringing her there, and he was doing that on purpose.
Right. So, and then Yoko will play this clip too. Then comes out and thanks Paul for saying that. I mean, because it's true, she did not, you know, break up the Beatles. And
Paul McCartney came out and cleared the air a little bit and said, look, you know, for those people
that was very sweet of him to do that. I'm sure that, you know, she got tons of letters saying, how dare you said that? I mean, you know, because they like the idea of us being in a boxing ring, you know, sort of fighting.
Also, it's good to have, people like having someone to demonize. People like having someone to blame, you know, and you were the easy target, I guess.
Well, you know, we know each other for such a long time, and she's a very sensitive and intelligent guy. So, of course, you know, she understands what was going on, that it wasn't going.
And like I said the other night, it's just, you know, it comes from, you know, the teenagers that grew up with the band, right? And then also, you know, the media at that time, you know, feeding us this lie And then what happens? Then those people that read this, then they'll tell the younger generation, right? And then that generation tells the next generation. And because I mean, in the 80s, when I first started listening to the Beatles, I mean, that's how Yoko Ono was. That's how I learned about Yoko Ono. Besides Hell in Paradise, the video, I learned about Yoko Ono broke up the band. So it's just like, okay, then I don't want anything to do with this woman because she broke up my favorite band.
It's a shame because there's so much to her that people could benefit from knowing, and this just got thrown upon her.
Right. And it's a shame. It's done. And thankfully for you and doing shows like this, we can hopefully, I think the narrative is really starting to, stop, with that nonsense. But I mean, you still see memes and gifs. I saw one the other day with it was Yoko and Captain Kirk, and Yoko was screaming, and then Captain Kirk was like, "Please beam me up, Scotty."
Well, I realized, it used to really hurt me too. I'd get very upset when I'd hear crazy stuff like that. And then one day, I was talking to her, and she was reading a review of it was Blueprint for a Sunrise album was out, and they reviewed it, and they said, "Oh, it's a song. It's time for action, and it should be called It's Time for Aspirin." And she was laughing. So I'm like, okay, if she's laughing, then I can laugh now.
Well, I mean, I can see her having kind of a sense of humor in a way about a lot of this, because I mean, obviously she knows the truth, so why not have a little laugh about it, I guess. But still, obviously she's one of the most positive people you'll ever see or meet.
And she has such integrity, and she was so like every time people would interview her, she's very eloquent. She has so much to say, but it would always, it wouldn't be about her work, but she would graciously talk about whatever they wanted, which was usually the same subject. And, but she had integrity. And in fact, here's a cool quote. She once said that it was always John's intention to make the world aware of my work, but it was hard for him to do that because the world was never accepting. And he had a woman who was very proud as an artist. He would suggest things like, let's get someone to cover your songs. I would say, no, I don't want anyone to cover my songs. And he'd say, well, what about me? And I would say, no, because other people think they're your songs.
Yeah, there you go.
Suggest that I dress up and have a photo session with all the right lighting and make a cheesecake photo. But I'm a feminist. I would say, no, why should I do that? To deliver me to the world, he had to tiptoe around my pride and cope with the world's attitudes. It was very difficult. And now I think part of me is feeling guilty that I was so difficult.
Wow. Yep. And that's another thing too. I mean, just the way her mind works. It's really amazing, and you really have to think, like when we're talking about her art or her lyrics, they're really thought-provoking, right? I mean, not everything is for everybody. I get that people might not like every little aspect of her career. However, you gotta admit, it's really thoughtful. It's really thought-provoking. It makes you think. It's just not something
it's valuable. That's the thing. Like she points things out. Like we're completely misplacing our values. We have value money over water and gold over air, and it's just the craziest thing. And she puts it all in perspective, and you realize, my God, well, how have I been thinking? How have I been living? And just being entertained constantly, how unhealthy that is for us. The judging, the competitions, she says, like, one day that's all going to end because society's got to evolve so that we're not doing that anymore and we're making use of our lives.
Interesting. Yeah. So again, the book. Well, I should say we just scratched the surface, really. I just wanted to have like a nice, friendly, peaceful, conversation about the relationship between Paul and Yoko. I know people will drag things in the mud. Why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you talk about that? Well, you know what? It's not about all the skeletons or the dirty laundry. I mean, it's just more of how they started off friendly. It may have gotten a little rough, in the middle, but then at the end, it's it's all fine and dandy. They got a complete understanding. They're friends with each other. They respect each other, right? And they're bonded by one of the greatest musicians of all time.
Right.
So but again, the book In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. Remind people again where you can get the book. Yes, Amazon, but what was the email again for?
It's conceptualbooks.com, and the book's website is inyourmindbook.com. You can read all the reviews in order through there too.
Right. And we'll leave the link in the description area. Please, if you've ever been curious about Yoko Ono, please check out this book. I don't think you will regret it. Some of the reviews, I mean, we talked about the reviews before. Let's just take another, second to talk about. It's fascinating how well, and it's very deserved success. I'm so proud of how well this is doing. I mean, you would think, in the 70s, 80s, maybe into the 90s, something like this wouldn't, be appreciated. I'm so happy that this is really getting the attention it deserves and the appreciation it deserves as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's from her colleagues are loving it. Guys that worked on her films with her, from back in the day. Her assistant and friend Dan Richter, Elliot Mintz is loving it. He called it a masterpiece. So it's getting to the right people and it's getting appreciated.
Excellent. Very, very, very good. Madeline, how can anybody get a hold of you? I mean, besides the website, I mean, are you Facebook? Do you do Twitter as well?
On Facebook under my name, Madeline Bocaro, and conceptualbooks@icloud.com if you want to email me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent.
And I have a website, madelinex.com.
Okay. Excellent. Again, please check out the book. Madeline, it's been great speaking to you. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. And Andy, get better. I know by the time this is posted, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. But for Two Legs, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Two Legs Podcast. Please check out if you're listening to the audio formats, please check us out on our YouTube channel, Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. We're really shooting for 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If we get there, that would be great. So please check us out there. Email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. If you got any ideas for show topics that you would like us to tackle, please feel free to email us there. And as always, everybody, thank you for joining us and have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Listening to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, hosted by Tom Hunyadi and Andy Nichols, with musical contributions by Dylan